Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week I am really excited because I'm welcoming back Alana Ruoso to the podcast. Hey, Alana.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yes.
For those of you who may not be familiar with Alana, she actually was with us back on episode 46, I think, where we talked about 10 curious ways we self-sabotage our creative careers. And it was such a great discussion because there's all kinds of stuff in there that we're all guilty of. And she's back this week to talk about jealousy and envy. But before we get into that, Alana is a certified career and success coach who works a lot with designers and creatives as well as other professionals. She is a graphic designer herself with over 20 years of corporate and creative experience, and she shows her clients with a little humor and honesty how to ditch struggle, own their value, and move their careers from vanilla success to spectacular triumph. And she gave us so much good advice on the last podcast that I thought she was perfect to bring back for this topic.
And, thank you.
And this came out of an episode I did recently. For those of you who may have heard it, it was episode number 60 with dance photographer Rachel Dyer, where we got into a little bit of a conversation about jealousy and how it's something we both struggle with a little bit, but that doesn't get discussed very often. And one of the things that Rachel mentioned, and we'll get into this further down the episode, is that she actually uses jealousy as a way to help motivate herself, which is an interesting way to work with it.
Yeah, it is.
But before we get into that, I think maybe the first thing we should talk about is the terms jealousy and the term envy, because they're often used interchangeably. But when I started doing a little research for this episode, I discovered that they're actually different.
Yeah, I loved that you brought this topic to the table, because as soon as you emailed me, I thought, wow, this is something that is really not talked about that often. I haven't been approached about talking about this subject, but yet it's actually something that I think about all the time, that I experience all the time, and all of us are going through at some point. And so I think it's really important to talk about this and kind of actually normalize a little bit of it. Definitely we'll talk about that. But the jealousy versus envy thing. So when you actually kind of look it up online, and I'm sure you've did some research, like some dictionaries will kind of use them interchangeably. And I think in our society, we kind of do. Like, I think we just kind of one or the other, whatever kind of rolls off the tongue. But I have found that usually jealousy has a much more kind of catabolic energy, like it's fueled by some kind of anger. So it feels a little bit more intense. And there's kind of a vibe behind it, like I want what you have, and I don't have it, and I'm kind of angry about it. And so there's like, I can't help but think of like a soap opera show or like a Lifetime movie, and it's just like, I'm going to get what you have. So jealousy can sometimes, to me, be more of a intense emotion fueled by some anger, whereas envy, it's a little less intense. There's not necessarily that resentment against a rival, but it's more like, okay, I see something I want or someone I want to be like, and I'm discontent that I don't have it. So in both of them, there's a person coveting something or that someone else has. But now that's kind of my interpretation. And, you know, I kind of do believe in semantics. I find that if I ever like say to myself, well, I'm really jealous of that person, I find as soon as I switch it to the word envy, I kind of relax a little bit about it, because I don't feel as stressed and I don't feel as judgmental about that emotion.
That's a really, I do find envy a softer word. Maybe that's how I would describe it. Jealousy, I do associate with anger. And I think jealousy is like this ugly word that we don't like to talk about. It's it has a lot of negative connotations. One of the things I read when I was doing my research is that jealousy is often associated with fear of losing something that you have.
Yes, right.
Which I also thought was very interesting, because that gets into the whole scarcity mindset as
100%.
well.
Oh, 100%. Someone's going to take something away from me. And so, especially, gosh, if you think about the last year and the pandemic, so much of our lives have been taken away from us. It's like, we don't want more things taken away from us. It's a deep-seated fear. And so that totally is accurate. I feel like jealousy is so much about something being taken away from us, because let's say, like thinking of those Lifetime movies, if a girl gets a spot on the cheerleading team that we can't get, she's taken our spot, right? Yes. So not like I was a cheerleader, but I can't help but think about that. So there's like, I've lost something because someone else got what I wanted.
Yeah. It's a very normal human emotion, I think. I think we all struggle with it at some point. I think some of us are probably a little more prone to it than others, but that probably has some other underlying causes, if we're really honest with ourselves.
It does.
But why are we so reluctant to talk about it or even acknowledge it? It's not a word you hear very often. One of the things that I do, and we can talk about this a little bit later, is I have a tendency, especially on social media, to mute people when I feel jealous. And I say that I'm doing it for my mental health, which is true. But really what it comes to is, if I'm really, really honest with myself, they're showing things that I either wish I had, or that I wish I had created, or that I wish I had thought of first, or that I was working on, but they put it out, like all those things. And I'm mad.
Yes. And it's good you're mad, because that is just a normal human emotion. And what you said before about normalizing jealousy, I think we really have to normalize all emotions. And that's hopefully what a lot of coaches are helping with, and therapists, and mental health awareness. Because I do think there is, so like you mentioned, like part of the reason it's like, why can't we talk about it? I think there's a few things going on. I definitely think right now, this kind of toxic positivity movement, which is a whole other episode in itself, but is really making it difficult for people to express when they have quote unquote negative emotions, something like jealousy or anger or resentment, or those are not really encouraged. And you're especially not encouraged to like talk about those on social media, because it's, positive vibes only.
Yes.
Which is just ridiculous. So normalizing the emotion and recognize it is so important. And without the judgment. So that's super, super important. So that's, I think, part of reason why we don't talk about jealousy. I think there's a couple other things going on. I think one is that, a lot of us have been told, be grateful for what you have. So if you're jealous of someone, you're not being appreciative of where you are or what you have. And that's just not true.
We're allowed to feel all the different emotions at different times. I think.
And it's like, someone said to me, I don't know, somewhere I read something, and it was like, you can love the body you have, but still want a six-pack. Like it's that place of being grateful for what you have, but you can still strive and want other things. And
Yes, that's really interesting. I find social media has become very much like this, that you are meant to accept what you have, because not accepting it is, like you said, it's either being ungrateful or allowing others to influence how you feel about yourself.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes you just want to strive for something different or more. And that's okay.
Oh, it's totally okay. And in fact, like, that's a sign of growth. That's a sign of someone who wants to grow, because to have ambition and to want to achieve things when it's coming from a really kind of healthy emotional place is kind of what helps the world work and creates a sense of fulfillment, as long as you're aligned with what you're doing. The other thing is the green monster concept. If jealous people, it's the green monster coming out. So right away, when you label a feeling with the word monster, well, people aren't really want to talk about that or show that part of themselves, because that's showing your dark side, or what you would call maybe the shadow self.
Yes. It's considered a very ugly emotion.
Yes.
It's, that's how it was always referred to in
Mm-hmm.
books when I was reading as a kid. It was like, it's an ugly emotion. You don't want to show ugly qualities of yourself.
Yes.
But the truth is, we all have ugly qualities. We do.
Oh,
It's just...
we are. We're all little monsters, running around, posting and living our lives, and we're little monsters trying to be bunnies all the time. But the fact is, that's not true. And again, like if you can look at it from a healthy emotional place, and you're feeling you can analyze it kind of rationally, then okay, this is just a sign of maybe something that I want. And as your guest Rachel would have said, it kind of can point you in the direction of where you might want to go.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really healthy way to look at jealousy when she said that. It wasn't even something I had even thought of, but yeah, it can absolutely be a huge motivator if I think the key is being able to admit that that's how you're feeling, and to be able to walk yourself back and figure out why you're feeling that way.
Yes.
And I think that's the hard part for a lot of people, because first of all, we're not willing to admit that we're jealous. So that's the big thing right there. And then second of all, if you can't admit that you're jealous, it's really difficult to figure out why you're feeling jealous, because you're not admitting the emotion in the first place. So
exactly. We're just not honest with ourselves a lot of the time. As humans, we just lie to ourselves, a lot. And when you are able to be honest with those feelings, with those emotions, whether it be in your journal or talking to a therapist or a coach or a friend, there's always a sense of relief. And, there's always someone there to say, oh gosh, I've felt that way too.
Yes. And isn't that something that's often mentioned, that sometimes if you can name the thing, it takes the fear and the scariness away from it, because now you know what the thing is. Okay, this is the thing. I'm jealous.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. Yeah.
So when we're scrolling through Instagram, or we're, I don't know, reading the news or doing whatever it is that we're doing, and we feel that feeling, and we all know the feeling. It's that feeling in your gut where you just have like something bubbles inside you, and you're just like, I don't like that. That's not fair. What can we do to identify what's really going on there?
Yeah. So if you're willing to be brave, and if you're willing to be honest, there's a couple things that I think could be helpful to some people. It's one thing is writing down what the trigger actually is. So let's say you're a painter, and someone's painted some beautiful work, and you immediately feel that jealousy come up. So you can actually sit with it and say, okay, what is the feeling I'm really feeling right now? And if you take that moment, let's just say it's inadequacy. Let's say, I look at her work and it's so amazing and beautiful. I feel really, really inadequate. Okay, so now you've got the word inadequate. And so giving it that inadequacy is making me feel jealous. So I think sometimes anger is often a secondary reaction or a secondary feeling. So you hurt and then you get anger. And I think jealousy can be the same thing. You feel something and then you're jealous. Like there's kind of like a trigger there. So if you look, okay, I'm feeling inadequate. Then there's a couple questions you can ask yourself. And one that I always love is, well, when was the first time I felt inadequate?
Ooh.
And you can do this with anything. Yeah, anything you feel, and you don't have to overthink it. It's great if you can write it down, but often you'd be surprised how easily some kind of memory will come up, and often from the childhood. So something will come up and you're like, wow, I really felt inadequate at that art fair from grade 4 or something like that. And so that's one question you can ask yourself and kind of journal on it to give yourself perspective. And then you can add this question, or you can do this question is, well, where in my life am I feeling inadequate right now?
Yes.
Bring it to the present and be like, where am I feeling that I'm just falling short? And write that down. And then you can start to see, okay, what is really happening here? And am I being rational about this? Like, am I actually, living an inadequate life? Chances are you're not. And if you're seeing it through the lens that everything you're doing is inadequate, then there's another very deeper layer there. But for the most part, you can start to see, if you see the origin of something, like the childhood part of it, it can really help you process it. Mm-hmm. And I also love the idea of thinking about the present, because you can rationalize it and start to find, I love the idea of finding things. Okay, well, where am I being totally competent in my life? So take that thing that's perceived as negative and find the opposite of it, and see that you are actually probably, doing really well.
You just made me think of something else, because I think sometimes we even have these feelings when somebody has achieved something we didn't even really want, mm-hmm. which I think is really interesting. Like you've decided, this is when I'm an introvert and I'm a Leo, so I always say I'm at cross purposes. I want to be the center of attention, but I don't want anybody to know who I am.
You're like a little walking contradiction.
Exactly. So sometimes I am quite happy being in the background, doing my thing, making my stuff. But every now and then, you see somebody you know really well, and mm-hmm. They're being interviewed on TV, or mm-hmm. This is happening, or look at all the people that are following them, or whatever. And underneath, I don't even want that, and yet I see them with it, and I'm like, oh man, and it's very contradictory, and that's the one I tend to recognize first, and mm-hmm, I have to kind of walk mm-hmm. myself back and say, you don't actually want that. Like, you've tasted that and you hated it, so why are you upset? Like, what is it that is making you angry about this?
Yeah, so that was going to be my question. I was going to ask you, like, how did you know that you didn't want that?
Yeah, usually it's something that I had a taste of, and I just know, like, I don't want to mm-hmm. be the center of attention. It makes mm-hmm. me very uncomfortable, and I mm-hmm. just start to feel crowded and claustrophobic, and I don't like it. And I don't like everybody knowing my business. Like, this is the thing with social media. We want all the followers. We want all the followers. We want all the people to know who we are. And yet, when you have that kind of exposure, you don't really get any peace and quiet.
No, and it sounds like peace and quiet is
my thing. That's my thing.
Yeah, and that's amazing to recognize. And I think part of what I'm hearing is, like, you almost want the exposure or fame, but you actually don't. You genuinely don't want it, but you want it in a way. And so when you see other people having it, there's a part of you that still just like, oh wow, I kind of want to be in that space because it would provide exposure and sales and all these things. But when you actually go back to your true self, you're like, no, I don't actually want that.
I think what it comes down to, if I'm really honest with myself, is I want the peace and quiet, but I do want to be acknowledged every now and then for mm-hmm. doing a good job.
Yeah.
We all
do. Yeah.
I work really hard, and it would just be really nice if every now and then that was noted by somebody. And I think, especially mm-hmm. when you're self-employed and you work from home and you work alone, and it can be this very lonely, insular existence, and you're churning stuff out, but you don't necessarily get the feedback that you would in an office or in another kind of setting. And so every now and then you just want somebody to notice and be like, hey, Melissa, that was amazing.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And that's so important to acknowledge, that we do need validation, and it can be in such healthy ways. So one thing that would be like that acknowledgement or exposure can come in so many ways. And so one thing that would be kind of an interesting exercise for anybody is just write down, if you're really uncomfortable with exposure and people kind of knowing about you, well, what are the ways you're actually comfortable? And so, it may be like you're happy if someone has you on their podcast, or if they write an article about you, but you don't want a camera stuck in your face and you don't want to do an Instagram live. But what are the ways that you're actually really comfortable having that exposure? And then make those a goal. Okay, well, I'm comfortable with this, so I want to get written up in a paper because I like the interview Q&A format. So then you can make that a goal. And then that's what you focus on, as opposed to everyone else who is, going on Instagram Live or Facebook Live, and you're like, ugh, I don't want that. So think about what you actually do want. It always goes back to, like, one way to kind of dampen jealousy in its kind of ugliest form is to stop the comparison, to just pull away from the comparison when possible. And that's why with social media, I don't know, I have no statistics to back this up, but I feel like jealousy is at an all-time high. So that is my interpretation of what's going on. And that's clearly coming from the ability to compare so much more easily than we could have even just a few years ago.
I think a lot of jealousy also comes out of a lack, especially with creatives. There often tends to be a lack of self-esteem and this whole imposter syndrome, and we're just a hack. And, you know, and then when you are scrolling through social media and like you said, everything is perfect and everything is beautiful and you're seeing the finished product, not the work that went into it, you start to be like, you know, I remember listening to a podcast probably around Christmas with photographer David Duchemin, and I will see if I can find the link to this in the show notes.
Okay.
But he was talking about, he has this great podcast called A Beautiful Anarchy, which is like 10 minutes long. Oh. But he did this episode on how we live in this culture of celebrating the thing, but we don't celebrate becoming the thing, because that's a huge, like, nobody just wakes up and takes the perfect photograph or paints the perfect painting or writes the perfect novel. That has to come out of us. We have to, and we don't celebrate the process. And when he said this, I was having a very bad day when I listened to this, and I remember just being like, oh, I was trying to paint a heart. I was trying to do my Valentine's line, and all my hearts turned out just garbage. I was so frustrated, and I went for a walk. I listened to this podcast, and I said to myself, I am going to go home and I'm going to paint as many hearts as it takes until I have the perfect heart. And if it takes me 100 hearts, then that's great, because I am going to go through the process of learning to paint the best heart. It was exactly what I needed to hear in the moment.
Amazing.
But this is kind of where I'm getting to, is that social media, we don't show the process of getting to the perfect thing. We just show the perfect thing. We don't show the chaos that is around the perfect thing. And so we tend to have these feelings of like low self-esteem. Like I said, the whole imposter syndrome. I mean, imposter syndrome. I've just been talking a lot about that one actually. And that's another episode, but I just love what you said about showing up for the process. And then the social media thing, it's true. We're seeing the final product, or we're seeing, which I think it was someone who wrote an article, I think it was on BuzzFeed, if I'm correct. I think she coined the term curated imperfection. And I love that term. I think it came out about a year ago. And because if they are showing you some of the behind the scenes or some of the process, it's still glossy. Yes. There's still the filter on it, right? So it's not like the actual truth. They're not seeing you not sleeping at night. You're not filming yourself tossing and turning in your bed because you can't come up with an idea or you feel like something's not working. That's not visible, but so I totally agree. If we're only seeing kind of the shiny, sparkly stuff, it's really easy to feel jealous. And then it's also really easy to feel, put ourselves down. Yes. So when we're on social media or wherever these things happen that we start to feel these feelings, I think, like we were saying, the first step is you have to identify what the feeling is. Yeah. This makes me mad. This makes me jealous. This makes me, and it's okay to have negative feelings. It's what it comes down to is how you channel that feeling into something positive, I guess, at the end of the day. But we really do have to kind of do a little bit of work and step ourselves back and figure out what it is that's causing these feelings. Yes. So when we're on social media, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, one of my first things to do is when something makes me uncomfortable or mad or whatever, I mute them. And I just say, I have to do this for my mental health, which, partly true. But also part of it is me avoiding it.
Yeah. And I mean, but here's the thing, you're recognizing that. You're already 100 steps ahead because you're recognizing, okay, I'm just ignoring this and I'm not going to deal with this. And I'm just going to mute it. And listen, I think there's everyone does the same thing. I do this. I do it. I mute people or unfollow. And sometimes just like a knee-jerk reaction because I'm in a cranky mood or I didn't have my cup of tea properly or something. But and that's okay. Again, that's totally normal. And so if there's one thing I hope you get from today, is just normalizing everything, every weird thing that we do. But if you keep getting triggered, and like that's what's happening, is like something in that post or that person is triggering you, I do recommend. I started this year, was it this year? Just starting a journal for triggers. So a trigger journal. And this was recommended to me by a coach. And so I specifically have one book that's just about things that trigger me. And I tell you that if you actually write them all down, everyone, consistently, you'll see a pattern. So you'll see that there's a theme to everything that's pissing you off. And that's getting onto you or making you feel jealous or inadequate or whatever that feeling is. So that is has been super helpful personally for me. It's just really getting a sense of it. Yeah. And again, goes back to, oh gosh, something that, some stuff that happened to me when I was younger, and it's just coming back and I'm interpreting it. That's really important to recognize too, is that what we're seeing on the post, we're interpreting it based on the filters of our life, based on our experiences. What we might be seeing or reacting to might not actually even be there, but that's what we're seeing and thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we're in that situation, I do think there's instances where muting certain people or unfollowing them or whatever the case may be is the right thing to do.
Of course.
But then there's by doing that very frequently, or finding ourselves doing that frequently, is that a sign that maybe we should take a moment and learn to be uncomfortable and figure out what's going on?
Yes. Yeah. And actually the word uncomfortable is perfect, because there is, I've always believed that we need to sit in discomfort, and I talk about it all the time. Anytime in almost every presentation I do or webinar, it's the word uncomfortable has to go in there somewhere, because it's just so important, because that's where the growth happens. And if you can recognize like you're just consistently uncomfortable with what's coming up, let's just say it's in your social media feed, then that is an amazing opportunity to see again what that theme is. Are you willing to look at it? And then there's also the question, what made you follow that person in the first place? Go back to maybe what their main platform is. Is this just one small thing? Is this just something that it's one tiny thing that's bothering me and I don't necessarily unfollow them? But it's really just looking at the discomfort for sure.
So once we realize that we're uncomfortable, this is not working for us, what are some of the steps we can take to address those feelings? You've mentioned journaling, which can be so helpful, and there's so many different ways you can journal.
That's super important to recognize. Is like, for people who are like rolling their eyes at the word journal. First of all, I hate that word. I just don't know what other word to use. If anyone has ideas, let me know, because I'm open. I think diary is 100 times worse, so we can't.
Diary makes you think of a 10-year-old girl, with
a lock and key and a rainbow and a unicorn, which is not a bad thing, but it's so. I'm looking for that new word, but So writing it down is in any kind of fashion that kind of works for you is really important. And then thinking about if whatever emotion that you're feeling when you're looking through that, you can also, to just divert your energy just temporarily, this is more of a temporary fix, but it also is very effective, is thinking about the exact opposite emotion that you would like to feel in that moment. So if you're feeling really, if it is spurring anger, so what is a way in that moment to feel like a small dose of joy? So that can be, going over to your dog and diverting your attention and just changing that energy space in the moment, so that you're not actually sitting in that space for too long. Because while you want to feel emotions and experience them, sometimes you have to get on with your day. Okay? Yes. You can't be, you've got work to do, you've got hearts to draw, you've got clients to make, Valentine's for. So thinking of ways in the moment to shift your energy, that's something that I work really hard with clients, is just like recognizing, okay, this is where I'm sitting kind of on an energetic scale, but where would I actually like to be effective for the rest of my day?
Right.
That can be really helpful as well.
That's an interesting one. Okay.
Yeah. And it's not easy, I'm going to say.
No,
it's like,
well, none
it's
of
kind
these
of
are
like
easy, really.
looking at a piece of chocolate cake and being like, oh, I'm just going to push this chocolate cake away for a few seconds when you really just want to eat the chocolate cake, you know?
I really feel like eating salad.
Yeah, and you don't really feel like eating salad, but you know you might feel better after. You know, sometimes you won't, but sometimes you will. I'm very pro chocolate cake, just to put that on the record. But yeah, so it's just it's kind of changing your energy in the moment can be something that's really helpful as well.
I do think it's important to recognize, though, that there are people you might be following or even that you're friends with, that you've just followed or been friends with forever. And sometimes you do just grow in different directions. And it's okay to not love the stuff they're putting out there anymore. And it's okay to distance yourself from that relationship. Like, that's okay to do.
Yes, again, giving yourself that permission piece. And the permission piece is really is a thread throughout this entire conversation, because you have to give yourself permission to feel the emotions, to feel the jealousy, feel the envy, and to unfollow people when you want to, and to, shift the dynamic of a relationship, whether it's online or in real life.
Once we've recognized what we're feeling and we've sort of done a little bit of work to figure out where that's coming from, and maybe a little bit of work isn't the right phrase, maybe. I mean, because it's ongoing work, really, is what it is. It's something that you're probably going to have to do for quite a while until you figure out what's really happening and how you can address it. But one of the things that Rachel mentioned in her episode, and we talked a little bit about it before we came on the air, is she said she's able to channel that in a positive way.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that. It's like, we've talked about this. We've got this negative emotion, this ugly, in quotes, emotion that we're not supposed to feel, but we're feeling it. So what are some things that we can do to channel it in a direction that works for us?
Yes, such a good question. And I'm, again, totally on board with how she perceives the use of, or the benefit of jealousy. So all of our feelings and emotions are guideposts for who we want to be and where we want to go. So whatever that emotion is. And so in the case of jealousy, you need to kind of, again, write out or elaborate, well, what is it that I'm actually jealous of? And then kind of bullet point all the things that you're actually looking for that you want. And let's say it is having the bigger sales, or having the press, all the press about me, or whatever it is that you're jealous of. And then being, first of all, honest with yourself that you actually want those things. And then think, okay, how, in small ways, what are the baby steps that I can do to get those things into my life? It's like acknowledging, I actually want some of these things, maybe not in the same way. You're going to manifest it in totally different ways. Everyone's got a totally different path, but it's like, I've been going through jealousy lately myself. And that's really back to the painter idea, is that I have been very disconnected from any kind of fine art for a long time, since I was in college, really. And I've noticed that it's coming up when I'm following a lot of artists on Instagram right now. We're talking a lot about social media today, but this really pertains to anything. But I've been really like, oh my gosh, I really want to paint something like that. And I would say 100% jealous. Like, again, I'm trying to switch it to envy, but I was like, I want to execute that. But to me, I was like, oh, this is so amazing. It actually made me kind of emotional when I thought about it a few days ago, because it is showing me a desire in me to paint, which I have not had in, I would say, 20 years.
That's really interesting. I think, that's a good one, because I think sometimes we feel jealousy for things that we haven't necessarily made any attempt to achieve ourselves. It's like, oh wow, they have, I don't know, like you said, you could be in an art gallery. I know we are talking about social media, but we've been in a pandemic for a year, and that's really been our only access to the outside world. Yeah. But let's say you were in an art gallery and you saw that, and yet, you're looking at it and it's like you're seeing this beautiful painting on a wall and thinking, oh yeah, and you realize that there's something there going on. But then you have to ask yourself, when was the last time I actually picked up a paintbrush?
Totally. And so you can be jealous of something to that point of like something that you've already done but left behind. And there's a part of me that is wanting to come out again or to resurface.
Mm-hmm.
And so the jealousy is like, this is a guidepost. It's like, you know what? You don't have the desire to do something unless you want to try it. And that doesn't mean that you have to do it forever. It certainly doesn't mean that I have to be a professional painter like that.
No.
I can paint and not be a painter. I don't think I'll probably add painter to my creative resume as like a formal thing, but there's a part of me that wants to do it. And so it was such an amazing, honestly, the jealousy was a gift in that moment when I really thought about it. And that was me taking the time like to really write down, why am I getting triggered? What is it about this that's making me kind of upset? And then it was like, oh, because this is actually something deep down that I want to do. And I do feel like I'm going to do it. I don't feel like tomorrow is a day. Maybe it is, but I'm kind of mentally preparing myself for this new experimental phase of painting, which I have not done. And they will be hideously ugly at first, and that's okay.
And you see, if you had simply muted all the artists that you follow, or if you'd stopped going to art galleries or doing all those things because it made you angry or frustrated, you would never have taken the time to figure out what was really bothering you.
Exactly.
And yet you've done that. You've figured it out. And now you're on the cusp of starting a new hobby that could bring you a tremendous amount of joy.
Yes, and that's exactly true. And it's like the discernment, discernment is something that's like very, sometimes not explained properly, but it's like, it's knowing when you're looking at that person on social media, is it just something that's triggering something like kind of dark in me? Or is it just something that is mildly uncomfortable, but I do need to look at this. Like I do need to keep engaging with this because I want to keep seeing the paintings. I want to keep kind of reminding myself that this is something I actually do deep down want.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned something else there that was really interesting when you said that, your paintings will probably be hideous when you start. And I think that's another thing is we need to remind ourselves is that, like you said, it's okay to be a beginner. You're not this, and I struggle with this, when I was in school, things academically came very easily to me. And it wasn't until I sort of got towards grade 11 or 12 and then university where I actually had to work to and so I tend to be the type of person if I try something new and it doesn't come to me immediately, it's like, oh, I'm hopeless at this, like forget it, and I just throw my hands up in the air and walk away. And I've learned over the years that that's okay. It's like the hearts, right? You know what, you're not good at hearts because you've never done a watercolor heart before. Like, you need to go and make all the hearts. Like,
oh, and let's remember that watercolor is like one of the hardest mediums, but it's I'm excited to try it at this point in my life because I have done a lot of the personal development work and done a lot of that kind of inner work. And I feel like I'm going to be way less judgmental of myself, which is very liberating, which means that I'll actually kind of keep going and I can accept that they won't look great, even though there's a part of my brain that's going to say, holy cow, you went to OCAD and you have an art degree. You should be amazing. You used to be able to execute somewhat okay paintings, and look at you now. These really suck. And, there's going to be that part of me that keeps going and that voice. And I'm just going to be like, what else? Like, I will keep going. I will.
And the interesting thing about it is that I'm sure you could post those initial attempts on social media, and there will probably be somebody who's looking at that and going, oh, wow, Alana's got all this time to paint. That's great. Good for her. Like, I wish I had
the
that.
Judgment. Yes, then we're back to the judgment. Oh my gosh, yes, there's going to be definitely... because painting is an indulgence, don't you know? It's like, oh gosh.
And I think that's another way you can channel something in a positive direction. You look at something like that and say, well, you know what? I spent an hour and a half watching Netflix last night before I went to bed. You know what? I could have picked up a paintbrush and tried it. And I think, that gets into a whole fear of like trying something new and, like you said, not being good at it and all of this. But when you start to really examine the jealousy and the envy, you really can start to see like there's some deep stuff going on here.
It's deep.
And there's some excuses being made. I think sometimes that's it. I think that's something that you could probably use to channel jealousy in a positive direction. It's kind of a way of calling yourself out. Like, you know what?
Yes.
Yeah, I could paint too. I just haven't made the time, or I haven't made the effort, or I haven't done this. Like, maybe I should do that. Then I could paint. And then
Totally.
Yeah, so it's an interesting way to kind of like just, call yourself out on all your excuses.
It's totally about the excuses, because we can use jealousy as kind of a diversion, like as a distraction. It's like, well, I'm just going to keep being jealous of this person. And, it's basically how we're using our energy. So we're really using our energy to distract ourselves and to kind of, entertain ourselves with our jealousy, instead of actually going over to the canvas and doing something a little bit more productive. And that can be an easy trap that we can fall into, for sure.
Yeah. I think it can also be a motivator at times to work harder. And I'm not trying to push, the hustle and all that kind of thing. But I think sometimes when we do look at what's going on with other people, we tend to think it all comes very easily to them. And jealousy can be a way to kind of remind yourself, but also motivate yourself, that if I want something, I have to put the energy and the effort in to making that happen. It's not going to land on my doorstep. Nobody's going to knock on my door and say,
no,
Alana, here's a canvas and some paints, and I know you're going,
Oh, and here's you can show them at this beautiful art gallery downtown.
Exactly. And I'm going to give you 10 hours this week with no interruption. Let's go. Right? Please. That's not going to happen. And so I think maybe if you're feeling those emotions, like when you step back and ask yourself, like, well, could I do this? Yeah, you know what? I probably could, if I actually took the time, or made the time, or figured out a way to put this into my day. And a lot of times I think that's I see that one a lot. That's not one that I tend to have an issue with. But I do see a lot of people who are like, oh, and it gets into this kind of bitchy talk where you're like, oh yeah, look at her. Well, she has this and her husband does all the work, so she doesn't have to worry about it, or she's got all this time because she doesn't have kids or whatever. And you sort of put all these negative things on that person when really it's you.
Well, here's the thing. Some other people may have advantages that you don't have.
That's true.
What does that mean? Who cares? It has nothing to do with your experience, because you do need to put in the hard work. So that is definitely, I love what you said about that. There is the sweat equity that has to go into it. Now, there's always a difference between, there's the sweat equity, the hard work, and the uncomfortableness is super key for learning anything new or trying to get better at something. Like you've been working at your craft a long time. I'm going to guess there's been some blood, sweat, and tears, right?
Yes.
So, but the one thing I'd love to distinguish, when this is a huge part of my kind of platform as well, is just understanding the difference between like hard work and struggle. So like hard work is you feel tired and satisfied. You're challenged, but you're proud. Like there's those emotions. And then struggle, you're just feeling angry and resentful and depleted and invisible, because you may be spinning your wheels or doing something that's not in alignment with what you actually want to do. So if you're forcing yourself to do painting because you think you should, and it's good for your, mental health, but you hate it, then that's putting yourself in a state of struggle, and it's going to be really like not helpful at all. And you're not going to really want to work hard at it. So you want to gravitate to things that you naturally want to work hard at, because the hard work part, that is inevitable. That is a part. You cannot be successful without some hard work.
Yes. Okay. You just said so many things here that I'm like, yes. I think, a lot of times we look at what's happening on wherever, social media, our friends, it doesn't have to be social media. It could be just your friend circle or your family even. I think sometimes we tend to feel jealousy towards siblings and things at times. And they're doing something and they're doing really well at it, and you're like, fine, I'm going to pick up a paintbrush too or whatever. But like you said, you hate painting. And I think sometimes jealousy can actually come out of this place where we're not really sure what it is we want. And we see everybody else doing something or enjoying what they're doing, or they're being successful by it, by their definition of success, or it's just really fun for them and they're putting it out there. And we're not so much jealous of the fact that they're painting or they're knitting or they're dirt biking or whatever it is they're doing. We're jealous of the fact that they found this thing that they love and they enjoy and they're really having a great time doing. Whereas we haven't figured out what that is for us yet. And that can be a really weird space to be.
That's it. You've nailed it. Basically, you're jealous of someone finding their joy. Like that can be a huge part of it. And it's like, so, you know what I feel really guilty about not loving in my life? I'm going to confess it. Like I really do not like gardening. Like I feel really bad about this, and I'm super jealous of people that enjoy gardening. I feel like you have a green thumb, right? I've seen
I'm a gardener, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I feel like I've seen this on social media. Surprise, surprise. I'm, you know, a nature loving, animal loving person who just, you know, I love going in nature, but the actual act of gardening has been something that I've wrestled with ever since I've owned a house. I feel really guilty of it. I'm super jealous of anyone who enjoys it. I find it a task that I have to do, and it stresses me out. Like it really stresses me out to garden, because I don't feel like it doesn't usually end well. Things die. It's not so fun. Okay.
Gardening is like golf. It's like so frustrating and maddening, but there's something very zen about it at the same time.
Right.
Too, but I get it.
Yes. Actually, that's funny. My friend keeps telling me to try golf, and I'm refusing. But anyway, maybe that's something I have to work on. But
that's how I feel. The way you feel about gardening is how I feel about golf. I just do not understand the point of it. But yes. So anyway, there's these things.
But I'm jealous of people that enjoy it, because I wish I was. Again, I want to be the gardener.
Yes.
But I have to accept that this is not where I'm really finding my joy. But I do find joy in other things. I mean, I love writing. I could say there's probably a ton of people out in your audience who really hate writing and probably wish they wanted to write to get their blog done or whatever. Fortunately, I enjoy it. So it's making peace with the things you want to do and letting go of the things you don't want to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think finding the things that bring you joy, that's a journey in itself. And I think we don't necessarily realize that, particularly when we're younger. Like when I look back at my 20-year-old self, or even my 30-year-old self, and I, you know, trying to figure out what was the thing. I mean, I didn't figure out the thing that really made me happy until I was in my mid-30s from a career standpoint. It took a long time. I did things that I got satisfaction from, and they were, you know, they were okay. I didn't have a job that I hated, but at the same time, I wasn't finding that thing that really did it for me. But once you do find it, and it is a bit of a journey, once you do find it, the hard work tends to come very easily. I mean, there's days where it's exhausting and you just are like, why am I doing this? But at the same time, because you found the thing that does bring you joy, the hard work becomes, like you said, there's some satisfaction at the end of the day. You're tired, but you're like, oh, I finally got that watercolor art.
Oh yeah, for sure. You just have that little check-in of that satisfaction check mark. Like you're like, oh, that did it. And so the fact that you're exhausted is totally fine, because it's from a very positive, aligned, fulfilled space.
Yeah. And if you haven't found the thing yet that brings you that joy, then this is your opportunity to try lots of different things. And I think that's part of growing as a person, but also part of figuring out what you're meant to be. And there's all this ridiculous pressure when you're in high school to figure it out. Like when you're in grade 10, it's like figure it out, because in grade 11 and 12, you have to take the right classes to get into the right university to do the program you want to do. And then you get to university and you're in third year and you're like, oh, there's this other thing over here nobody even told me about. Right?
Of course, yeah.
And there's this whole pressure put on us from a very young age that if you don't figure it out by the time you're 20, you've just wasted your life.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. I think some of us find our gifts and what we love to do really young, and then some of us find it later in life, and all of those things you try and experiment with just become part of, you know, the fabric of your story, and you can share those experiences with other people. And if you still haven't found what you're kind of wanting to do, then my advice to you would be just go out and be as bad at as many things as possible, because that means you're starting and trying different things.
Yes. Enjoy the badness.
Enjoy it, like embrace it. It's like anything you try, and especially if you're trying, let's say, a new sport, it's like that's always the most humbling experience, right? So if you can just, but you know that if you just keep showing up, let's say you want to do golf and you keep showing up to that golf course, you will eventually be better. And again, going back to the permission of being that really bad golfer so that you can see if it's something you want to keep doing.
And golfing and gardening.
Yeah.
They are.
How did we talk about that? How did we end up talking about this?
The interesting thing with the golfing and gardening, the only person you compete with is yourself. Like when you're on the golf course and you have a bad shot, there's nobody to blame. It's you, right? So it really does become this. Same with gardening. Like Mother Nature's out there throwing curveballs at you all the time, just like she is on the golf course with wind and water and all these things. But at the end of the day, the people who do it because they like the challenge of getting better at whatever it is they're trying to achieve, whether that's golf or their handicap or whatever. But yeah, that's one of the things I always feel like with gardening and golf is like the only person to call out when you're not doing well at those is yourself.
Yeah, and the truth of it is I've kind of reluctantly obviously been gardening for the last few years, and I did get a little better at it. I mean, I just learned, of course, petunias are good. Petunias will work. Petunias are not going to make me cry. Yes. They will sort of survive. So I did get better at it. Now, again, the satisfaction kind of isn't where I feel I want it to be, but maybe eventually I'll hire a gardener, but that is for now, it's like, I'm okay doing this experience.
It's totally okay to not be okay with gardening.
Yeah. And just let it go and just make my garden the best I can. But I'm only one way I kind of manage it, especially when there's things in life you have to do that you don't really want to do, is I really give myself a finite amount of time that I spend on it. Yeah. So it's not going to eat into more of my life and take up energy that I want to put into other places of my, other things.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up, I actually want to flip this conversation around a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about what happens when we have friends or colleagues who seem to be exhibiting some signs of jealousy or envy towards us, which I think most of us have probably experienced at some point. You have a moment where you kind of know that things aren't quite right. What are some ways that we can deal with those? Because I think like some of the things you might find, to give an example, when I first quit my job and I had a good corporate job, I was paid well, I had great benefits, I had all the things that kind of mark success. And I quit my job to become self-employed. And this is where I noticed a lot of snarky comments from people who I thought were really good friends, and a lot of I don't know, it was worded as a compliment, but it was not said in a tone that was a compliment.
Like a backhanded
compliment. That's a good way to put it. And all these little things. And it was very hurtful at the time. But as time went on, I realized, okay, it was when a friend actually pointed out that, you're doing something that a lot of people really wish they could do, and they feel that they're not able to do it. And there's a little bit of jealousy going on there. And it was a light bulb for me. I was like, oh, okay. Like all of a sudden it made sense, but I didn't really know how to handle it. So what are some things we can do there if we start to notice that, maybe our circumstances have changed, or we're doing something new and we're just getting those those weird feelings from the people around us.
It's so hard. So when you do kind of get one of those, let's say it's a comment or an email or however it comes across, and you're feeling that it's kind of like that jealousy fueled, the first thing to say is, isn't that interesting? So start looking at it with a curiosity perspective, so that that's going to release a little bit of judgment, and it's going to be a little bit, it's going to take the anger down a little bit, or the upsetness a little down. So look at it from a curiosity perspective, and then to your friend giving you the pointing things out, 100% when someone is really trying to take you down or says something a little bit snarky like that, it is jealousy because it's their issue. It's like you are bringing something to light that they don't want to see in themselves. So it might be something as obvious as they wish they could leave their job and be an entrepreneur, or it could be something like they wish they could do more artistic endeavors in their life. There's like a whole bunch of different layers, and the thing is, you're not really going to know what's triggering them, but they're being triggered, there's that word again, by something that you're doing, and you're bringing it in front of them. So they probably don't have ill intentions in many
no, I think very rarely is it they're intending to be mean or hurtful or whatever. It's something they're struggling with on their end.
And I hate to be that person. Like I'm always about, taking kind of responsibility for obviously what we're doing. But in this case, it's like, it really isn't you, it's them. It's like their filter affecting what they're seeing and their trigger. And you really have to have the strength to brush it off.
Yeah, I think so. That's a hard one when you're on the other end of it, because especially if they're people who you are really close to or who you love or who are family, and you don't, on the one hand, you want to alleviate those feelings they're having, but at the same time, you don't want to not feel the feelings that you're having of joy or happiness or whatever it is that, is triggering them, because then you're denying yourself what you've spent all this time and energy working towards.
Yeah, and you're not responsible for alleviating their feelings.
And I think sometimes, particularly as women, I think we try to make sure everybody around us is comfortable rather.
Oh, for sure. And if you're any way empathic, like I get so uncomfortable when people feel uncomfortable that I will do whatever I can to kind of diffuse the discomfort and like make them feel better. And gosh, I do this at parties all the time. If I see anyone kind of struggling, back when we saw people, but then I've just realized I can't spend, again, how much of my energy am I going to spend trying to make sure everyone else's feelings are okay, when I really need to just go forward with what's making me happy. And if it's running my own business, then I just have to keep going. And the truth is, the more people who are jealous of you just means that you're doing something pretty badass and pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think too, sometimes you just, you're evolving in different directions from those people. And sometimes they're, most of those people who were a bit snarky with me when I first started, most of them grew into it, and I knew it wasn't, once it was pointed out to me what was going on, I knew it wasn't coming from a bad place. But there were one or two that we just wound up drifting apart because we just didn't see the world the same way. And I couldn't, this is what I was doing for a living. I couldn't change that. And it's funny what you just said about being empathic. My favorite thing to do is to go to the movies by myself, because I don't have to worry about whether or not the person I'm with is having a good time.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's amazing awareness. Yep.
Like if it's a movie I really want to see and I'm super excited about it and I feel like I've dragged them there, and then they're sitting there and I'm like looking at them through the whole movie, like, are they enjoying it? They're not having a
super
good time.
Stressful.
And the movie's over and I didn't even watch it.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you need to watch the movie by yourself and not worry about what's going on around you so much.
Totally watch the movie by yourself. That's like the best way to put it. Yeah. Yes. And you do want to surround yourself with people that are going to celebrate your success. And I don't mean in that really like high five, you go girl, like boss babe vibe of Instagram, where it's like fake support or like, I mean, the real genuine people around you in your life, like human, like real people who, some of them can be unsocial, but want to celebrate your success. Because someone said to me, or somewhere I read, it can be really easy to actually be there for someone when they're down, because it makes you feel valuable. It makes you feel like, oh my God, I'm helping them. I'm getting them through a hard time. It's actually helpful to your ego. And it also allows you to be like, oh God, well, thank God my life's not this bad. Like makes you feel grateful. But to be there for someone when they're really having super success in their life, that actually is harder because you have to push away any jealousy and just show up for your friend. So you want to be the friend who can show up for the successes, and you want to surround yourself with the friends that genuinely are so excited for your success.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think it's also just really important to realize that life is up and down. Like you're going to have up moments where they're down, and they're going to have you're going to have down moments where they're up, and there's, it's a bit of a wave that you have to ride. But ultimately, like, as you said, you want to surround yourself with the people who can be there when you're up and they're down, and when they're up and you're down.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not conditional. It's not like, well, I'll just be your friend when you're down or up, or vice versa. So it's like, I know if I think about like the closest friends in my life, 100%, they would be celebrating all of my successes, even if they were in a similar industry, and you would, may want a similar success for themselves. It would never take away from what they're celebrating with me.
Yes. And I think that's where coming at things from an abundance mindset is really helpful. If you are somebody who's always struggling with the scarcity mindset, you're going to really struggle when the people around you are doing well.
Because it goes back to that idea of jealousy, where someone's taking something away from you, and it actually has nothing to do with that. So like they can be successful, you can be successful. And, the only times where there is, where scarcity, you can feel it more, is more in the sports world, where there's actually limited positions, limited gold medals, limited things. Like that's a little bit different.
Where it is an actual measured competition.
Yeah, it's more measured, but most of us are not, training for the Olympics. So in, other areas of life, there's so much opportunity. You're not taking something away. There's a billion spaces available for people to be successful.
Yes, and I think this is something that also comes with experience as well. I think it's one of the things I have definitely become much more comfortable with as I've gotten older, and I've just realized that, there's lots of doors and lots of windows to open, and just because somebody opened a window over there doesn't mean I can't open a window down here, right? There's more than enough work. The more entrenched I get in certain industries, the more I realize, like, there's just so much work here. If everybody could just stop getting into their own heads or squabbling over things. Like, there's just so much to be done, and you can create space for yourself. That's the other really cool thing about when you come at things from an abundance mindset is, you know what? You don't see the space for yourself, make the space. You can do that. There's infinite space. So
that's the point about trying to make it your own and do it in your own way, as opposed to just seeing how someone else is doing it and thinking that you need to copy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this was a really great episode. Thank you so much for coming. This was a fun conversation. I'm really glad we did this, and
I love it.
I know Rachel listens regularly, so Rachel, thank you very much for the idea.
Thank you. I agree, and thank you for sparking this topic, because it's hopefully helpful to your listeners. But selfishly, I just really got so much out of reflecting on it before our conversation, and just where I am in my life right now. It was like, this is so interesting, and let's normalize all of these green monsters out there.
Yeah, definitely. And be willing to have the conversation, be willing to be honest with ourselves about what's really going on with ourselves. So
absolutely.
So yes, thank you so much, Alana, for coming on this week. I really enjoyed this, and I hope we can have you back again another time. We have these juicy, meaty conversations.
I do. I love it. I know.
I love it too. So it's great.
I feel like we definitely have more to talk about, and I really appreciate being on your show. I love it.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody. We talked about a lot of different things today. I'm going to put as much information in the show notes as I can with the links. Some of the episodes where we've talked about this before. But before we leave, Alana, where can people find you on the internet?
Yes. Okay. So my website is www.alanaruoso.com, which is ALANARUOSO. And I'm on Instagram as well at Alana Ruoso. And those are probably the two. Oh, LinkedIn. I'm also pretty active on there, actually. So you can find me on any of those platforms.
Yeah. And you have also done a number of other guest podcast episodes on some other really great Canadian podcasts. So if you want to hear more of what Alana has to say, you can just search for her in your podcast app and those episodes will pop up and you can have a listen to some of the other really good conversations that she's had out there. So thanks again, Alana.
Thank you, Melissa. We'll chat soon.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And I will be back again next week with another new episode. Talk to you all then. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.